Have you ever been judged simply because of how you look? Picture this: a young girl named Emily Parker walks into a grand concert hall. She's blind, dressed in worn clothes, with nothing but quiet confidence. Around her, whispers turn to laughter. Some point. Some mock. To them, she doesn't look like a pianist, certainly not one worthy of the stage. But then, Emily takes a deep breath, sits down at the piano, and begins to play. What followed wasn't just music. It was a revelation that silenced an entire crowd and unearthed a secret long buried in silence. This is the true story of a girl who couldn't see the world, but made the world finally see her. Everyone in the grand concert hall turned to see who had just stepped onto the stage. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Some leaned back in their velvet seats, unimpressed. Others exchanged doubtful glances. At the center of it all stood a teenage girl, small, pale, and quiet. Her name was Emily Parker. Her eyes didn't meet theirs, not because she was shy, but because she couldn't see them. Emily was blind. She wore an oversized coat that hung off her shoulders, shoes with scuffed soles, and clutched a white cane like a lifeline. The spotlight cast a soft glow over her as she made her way toward the piano, guided only by the echo of her own careful steps. Every movement was deliberate, fragile, like walking on glass. She could hear them judging her, the subtle laughs, the sighs of disapproval, the whispers questioning why someone like her was allowed to perform on such a prestigious stage. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained calm. Not out of confidence, out of resolve. She had heard these sounds before. She had been overlooked, dismissed, mocked. And yet, she was here. Reaching the piano bench, Emily sat down slowly. Her trembling fingers hovered above the keys. For a brief moment, the world fell silent. Then, she began to play. The first note rang out like a soft whisper. The next, a steady heartbeat. With every chord, the audience's breath seemed to catch. The melodies poured from her fingertips not just as music, but as memories, of loneliness, of courage, of a girl fighting to be seen through the darkness. Her body swayed gently with each phrase, and tears welled in the eyes of strangers who, moments ago, had doubted her. No one saw it coming. But by the time Emily finished, the entire hall had changed. And so had the way they saw her. The final note of Emily's performance hung in the air, delicate and fragile, like the last breath of a dying star. The hall, once filled with murmurs of skepticism, had fallen into an uncanny stillness. She kept her fingers pressed lightly on the keys for a moment longer, as if to savor the silence that had enveloped her, the echo of her song still vibrating through the space. She could feel her heart racing beneath her chest, each beat a reminder of the nerves she had fought so hard to control. Her palms, slick with sweat, rested in her lap as she sat motionless for a long moment, the weight of the performance settling heavily on her shoulders. She had done it. She had played. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it had been enough. Slowly, she stood up from the piano, her legs shaky beneath her, betraying the nerves she had kept hidden throughout the piece. Her gaze swept across the hall, searching for a familiar face among the crowd, her eyes locking onto her mother's tear-streaked face. Grace was standing at the back, her hand pressed to her mouth, as if she were trying to hold back the sobs that threatened to escape. Seeing her mother's pride, Emily felt a warmth flood her chest, though the weight of her anxiety still gripped her. Then came the applause. It started softly, a few hesitant claps, unsure of what they had just witnessed. But it didn't stay uncertain for long. Like a dam breaking, the sound grew louder, swelling in intensity. The room seemed to pulse with energy as the audience stood, cheering, clapping, many even dabbing at their eyes with the backs of their hands. Emily's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, She wasn't sure if she could breathe at all. The noise felt both foreign and overwhelming, but in the best way. She had done it. She had broken through the walls of doubt. Yet, despite the overwhelming joy of the crowd, Emily could feel her pulse quicken, a tightness growing in her chest. This moment wasn't as simple as it seemed. She had earned their applause, yes, but somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew that there was still one person who hadn't been convinced. One person whose opinion, despite her hopes, still mattered. Her eyes scanned the front row, and there he was. Mr. Carter, the chairman of the academy. His expression was cold, unreadable. He didn't rise with the others. His arms were crossed tightly, his posture rigid, as if he was studying her, evaluating her performance with an emotionless gaze. It was as if nothing had moved him, not the music, not the emotion in the room, nothing at all. Emily's stomach dropped. The applause was like a wave crashing against her, yet his stillness was a stone in her gut. She had hoped, with all her heart, that he would see her, not just the little girl who had once struggled to play, but the woman who had poured every ounce of herself into that song. But his face gave her nothing. No approval. No recognition. Only indifference. As the crowd's cheers died down, Emily's legs wobbled beneath her, and she took a shaky step back, bowing in gratitude to the audience, even though her mind was still on the man in the front row. She could feel a knot tightening in her throat, and before she could gather her composure, she saw him stand. He wasn't clapping, wasn't smiling, wasn't even looking her way. His stern expression remained unchanged as he turned and walked briskly toward the back of the hall, disappearing behind the heavy curtains. Emily stood frozen, watching him go. Her heart sank deeper with every step he took away from her. The applause felt hollow now, like an echo of something she had once wanted but could never fully grasp. The applause was not the victory she had imagined, it was a mask, covering the one truth she still feared. She had done everything right, but she still couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be enough for him. The applause had been real. But her battle, the one that truly mattered, was far from over. The heavy applause that had once filled Emily's ears now felt distant, almost like a faint hum that was barely audible, lost amidst the tumultuous thoughts swirling in her mind. Her heart still pounded, but it was a different kind of rhythm now, an anxious, unsettled beat that refused to be calmed. She had done it. She had poured everything into that performance. Her fingers had danced across the piano keys with the kind of precision that only years of practice and sacrifice could have afforded her. And yet, as she moved slowly toward the backstage area, away from the bustling crowd and the praise, there was an undeniable emptiness that clawed at her chest. Her legs felt heavy, as though the weight of her own self-doubt was anchoring her to the floor, making each step feel like a burden. She had worked tirelessly for this moment, fought through the exhaustion, the late nights, the overwhelming pressure. But now, in the quiet aftermath, it felt as if nothing had changed. Not really. The sting of the silence that followed the applause was unbearable. In the cold, dimly lit corridor behind the stage, the usual noise of crew members bustling around seemed muted. The lights overhead flickered slightly, casting harsh shadows that made the place feel even more isolated. Emily paused for a moment, leaning against the cool concrete wall, her breath ragged and shallow as she tried to steady herself. She closed her eyes, taking in a slow, deliberate inhale, trying to silence the growing storm inside her. But the thoughts kept flooding in. She had given everything she had. Every ounce of her heart and soul had been channeled into that music, into the performance that was supposed to be the culmination of all her years of sacrifice. But it still wasn't enough. It would never be enough, not for him. A dull ache began to settle in her chest, a familiar weight of disappointment that she couldn't seem to shake. She had seen it in his eyes. Mr. Carter's gaze had never wavered from his cool detachment, as if he hadn't even bothered to acknowledge the effort she had poured into the performance. And that look, that cold indifference, cut deeper than any criticism he could have voiced aloud. "I don't know why I keep trying," Emily muttered under her breath, her voice cracking slightly as she let the tears she'd been holding back threaten to spill. She wiped at her eyes, frustrated with herself for letting the vulnerability take over. She couldn't afford to break down now. Not when she was so close. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps approached from behind, and Emily stiffened, her stomach tightening as she instinctively straightened up. She knew that gait, had known it for years. It was Grace, her mother, and for a fleeting moment, Emily almost felt a sense of relief, as if her mother's presence might somehow smooth over the chaos inside her. But even as Grace rounded the corner and saw her, her face filled with concern, Emily couldn't help but feel like an imposter, like she was wearing the mask of a daughter who had it all together. "Emily," Grace's voice was soft but filled with pride, "you were incredible. I've never seen you play like that before. You did it. You finally did it." Emily forced a tight smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She could feel the warmth of her mother's embrace, but it felt distant, like she was trapped in a fog that refused to lift. Her mother was proud of her. But that was never the issue, was it? "Thanks, Mom," Emily replied, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't find the strength to lie and say she felt the same way. She wanted to tell Grace everything, that her heart was still pounding with disappointment, that all she wanted was for Mr. Carter to see her. Really see her. But the words stuck in her throat, lodged there by an overwhelming mixture of shame and frustration. Grace pulled back slightly, her brow furrowed in concern. She studied her daughter's face, sensing the unease beneath her calm exterior. "You don't seem happy. You've been working for this moment for so long. Why aren't you smiling? You should be ecstatic." Emily shook her head, the weight of her own emotions too much to bear. "I don't know, Mom. She let out a long breath, feeling the words pour out before she could stop them. "I thought tonight would be it. I thought, after everything, after all these years of trying, it would finally matter. But it doesn't." She ran a hand through her hair, her fingers trembling. "He didn't even clap. He didn't even look at me. Not once. It's like I wasn't even there." Grace's expression softened, and she stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. Her touch was warm, comforting, yet Emily couldn't shake the cold emptiness creeping through her veins. She wanted so badly to believe her mother's words, to feel that sense of victory, but all she could feel was the painful echo of Mr. Carter's indifference. "You've worked harder than anyone, Emily," Grace said gently, her voice unwavering in its confidence. "You don't need him to see you to know how far you've come. I've seen it. You've earned this. You've earned everything." But Emily wasn't so sure. "It's not enough," she whispered, the quiet pain in her voice so palpable that Grace immediately softened her approach. "I don't know how to keep going when it feels like the only person who matters doesn't care." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the only sound the distant hum of voices and the clinking of equipment being moved. Emily's throat tightened as she tried to fight back the tears. She had always prided herself on her resilience, but now, in this moment of raw vulnerability, she felt like a failure. Just then, a voice broke through the heavy silence. A voice that sent a sharp jolt through Emily's chest, making her freeze in place. "Emily," came Mr. Carter's voice, cold and unyielding. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Her breath caught in her throat, and her body stiffened. It was him. He was standing there, his figure outlined by the dim hallway light. For a moment, all she could do was stare at him, her mind whirling in disbelief. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. He took a step closer, his expression unreadable, his eyes locking onto hers with a quiet intensity that seemed to pierce through her. He opened his mouth to speak again, and this time, his words were deliberate. "We need to talk." Emily's heart raced in her chest as Mr. Carter appeared in the dimly lit hallway, his silhouette framed by the low, flickering lights above. The air between them seemed thick with tension, almost suffocating. For a moment, time slowed. Her fingers instinctively curled into fists, her nails pressing into her palms, as though bracing herself for an impending storm. He had been silent for so long, his presence had loomed over her throughout the evening, an unspoken judgment that she couldn't escape. The reality of his gaze, always watching, always waiting, made the room feel smaller with each passing second. She had come to this performance with one goal, to make him see her. To show him that she was worth his attention, worth his approval. Every note she had played earlier, every gesture, had been carefully constructed with the hope that, somehow, it would impress him. But standing here now, with him standing in front of her, Emily realized how futile that had been. The very idea that his approval could fill the emptiness inside her now felt hollow. "Mr. Carter," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling in the silence. She hated how weak it sounded, how small she felt compared to the towering figure before her. She tried to steady herself, but her hands felt clammy, the sweat beading on her forehead as if the pressure of the moment was closing in on her. "Is this what you wanted?" Her voice was sharper than she had intended, cutting through the quiet tension like a blade. Her anger flared as her emotions surged, anger at him, at herself, at the years of trying so hard to earn something that was never hers to begin with. She had pushed herself, sacrificed pieces of herself, thinking that if she could only prove her worth in his eyes, everything would make sense. But now? Now she was unsure. What had she been trying to prove? Who was she really doing all of this for? Mr. Carter's gaze didn't waver, his face unreadable, his eyes locked on her with that same piercing intensity she had grown to dread. He was not the type of man who gave anything away easily, but there was something in his posture that told her he wasn't here to play games. He wasn't here to criticize or tear her down. This wasn't just another moment in which she could prove herself to him, it was a turning point. "Do you think I don't see you, Emily?" His voice was surprisingly calm, a deep rumble that felt like it was vibrating through the floor beneath her feet. She flinched, not expecting such a direct confrontation. She had expected to be dismissed, or worse, patronized. But instead, there was something different in his words, something that made her feel both seen and vulnerable at the same time. Her breath hitched in her throat. She had imagined 1,000 scenarios of what this conversation might be like, but this was not one of them. She had always assumed that Mr. Carter saw her as just another student, just another face in the crowd, but now, his words made her question everything she had believed. "I see more than you think," he continued, his voice now lower, almost as if speaking to himself. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and the space between them seemed to shrink with every step he took. "I've been watching you, Emily. But not in the way you think. I've been waiting for you to stop seeking validation outside of yourself. I've been waiting for you to understand that your worth isn't tied to anyone else's opinion." She couldn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the floor, as though his words had paralyzed her. She had spent so much time trying to earn his approval, to be someone worthy of his recognition, that she never once stopped to consider if she was enough on her own. Everything she had done, every performance, every perfect note, had been aimed at impressing him, gaining something from him, something she thought would fill the empty space inside her. But now, as his words sunk in, she realized how wrong she had been. She began, but her voice faltered, caught in the tide of her emotions. She opened her mouth again, but no words came. What could she say? How could she explain to him what it felt like to live with this constant hunger for approval, for validation, for someone, anyone, to tell her that she mattered? The silence between them grew thick, and she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. Her thoughts were spinning, caught between anger, shame, and the unsettling realization that everything she had believed about herself, about what she had to do to earn someone's love or respect, was built on falsehoods. Mr. Carter, sensing her turmoil, stepped even closer, his presence enveloping her. His eyes softened, just for a moment, as though he understood the depth of her struggle. There was a flicker of empathy, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. "You've been looking for something outside yourself, Emily," he said softly, his voice now almost gentle. "You've been looking for someone to tell you that you're enough. But that's not how it works. The answer has always been within you. It was never about me. It was always about you." The truth of his words crashed over her, and in that moment, Emily's heart seemed to stop. The anger, the frustration, the years of working for someone else's approval, all of it suddenly felt irrelevant. She had been chasing a dream that wasn't even hers to chase. Tears sprang to her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away, not wanting to show weakness. But her chest tightened, and she could feel the flood of emotions rising, everything she had buried, everything she had denied, coming to the surface. She had wanted him to see her, to recognize her worth, but what had she been doing all along? Why had she let herself get lost in someone else's perception of her? "I've been trying," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She couldn't hide the vulnerability in her words now. "Trying to prove that I'm enough. That I can be worthy of something, of you." She felt foolish saying it aloud, but the words had already left her lips. And in the quiet after, she felt a shift, a subtle, yet significant change. Mr. Carter's gaze softened even more, if that was possible, and he let out a slow, almost imperceptible breath. "You've always been worthy, Emily. You just needed to realize it for yourself." A weight lifted off her shoulders, and for the first time, she felt a deep sense of release. The years of pushing herself, of proving herself to everyone except herself, began to feel distant, like an old, faded memory. "I understand now," she said quietly, a shaky breath escaping her as she took a step back, the space between them finally feeling like it was her own. "I think I've been looking for the wrong thing all this time." Mr. Carter gave her a nod of understanding, as if acknowledging her realization without saying another word. He didn't need to say anything more. The lesson had been taught, not through his words alone, but through the weight of the silence that followed. With one last lingering look, Mr. Carter turned and walked away, leaving Emily standing alone in the dimly lit hallway. The sound of his footsteps faded into the distance, but something inside her had changed. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was chasing something or someone anymore. She had found herself, finally. And that was enough. The days following the encounter with Mr. Carter felt like an endless stretch of time, each minute dragging its feet as if reluctant to allow her the peace she so desperately sought. Emily moved through them like a person sleepwalking, her body on autopilot, doing the bare minimum to get through the day. She found herself haunted by the quiet of her apartment, the stillness that had once been comforting now feeling oppressive. Every morning, as she stood in front of the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. There were no clear answers, no immediate relief from the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in her mind. She was left to confront the deep, gnawing uncertainty that had begun to take root in her chest. She wanted so desperately to break free from the chains of expectation, to let go of the burden of constantly measuring herself against others. But how could she? How could she be sure that what she was doing was right, that she was finally doing it for herself. The questions kept piling up, heavier with each passing hour. And yet, somewhere deep inside her, there was a flicker of something. A faint, fragile sense of clarity that told her that this journey, this slow, painstaking unraveling of all the parts of herself she had tried so hard to ignore, was, in fact, necessary. It was as if, after all this time, she had been holding her breath, waiting for permission to simply be. To be herself. But it was only now, after everything had broken down, that she realized the only permission she needed was her own. One afternoon, after several sleepless nights, Emily found herself at her favorite cafe. The familiar hum of indie music, the warmth of the sunlight streaming through the windows, and the comforting smell of freshly ground coffee beans enveloped her, grounding her in a moment of stillness. She sat at her usual corner table, her journal open in front of her, but her hands rested on the edges, motionless. She had tried to write before, but the words wouldn't come. They felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else. The weight of the silence settled around her, and for the first time in days, she let herself feel it fully. She didn't push it away. She let herself sit in that discomfort, just breathing. The cafe wasn't crowded, but there was a buzz of soft conversation in the background. People were going about their days, lost in their own worlds. Emily, for once, was content to let herself be just another person in the crowd, no need to stand out, no need to chase after attention. It was in that quiet surrender that she began to feel something shift inside her, a lightness, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Her eyes drifted to the open page in her journal. And without thinking, her hand reached for the pen. This time, it didn't feel like a chore. She wasn't writing to impress or to explain. She wasn't writing to be understood by anyone other than herself. The words came slowly at first, tentative, like the brush strokes of a painting yet to take form. But the more she wrote, the more she found herself unraveling the tangled thoughts in her mind. She wrote about how it felt to finally, after all these years, start living for herself. She wrote about the fear, the confusion, the raw vulnerability of breaking down everything she had once believed to be true about herself. And yet, through it all, there was a strange, comforting clarity. "I don't need their approval," she wrote, her handwriting growing bolder with each sentence. "I don't need anyone to validate my choices. I am enough. I have always been enough." The act of writing, of putting those words down on paper, felt like a quiet revolution. It was a declaration of self-acceptance. No more pretending. No more masking the parts of her that didn't fit the mold. No more living for the approval of others. The truth was simple: she was learning to trust herself, to be her own source of strength, to believe in her own worth. As the last rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow across the cafe, Emily closed her journal and leaned back in her chair. A sense of peace washed over her, a kind of contentment she hadn't known in years. It wasn't an explosive moment of epiphany. It was quieter than that. It was the stillness after a storm, the calm that came after the chaos had subsided. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking the moment. Emily glanced at the screen and saw a message from her best friend, Sophie. "I've been thinking about you. How are you holding up?" Emily smiled softly, feeling a sense of warmth in her chest. Sophie had always been there for her, steady and unwavering. With a deep breath, Emily typed back, "I think I'm starting to understand something important. Something I've needed to realize for a long time. I'm okay, Sophie. Really, I am." The response was simple, but it felt significant. It was a promise to herself, a promise that she would no longer chase after external validation, no longer hide behind the walls of self-doubt. For the first time, she felt like she was standing in her own truth, and it was enough. She was enough. As the evening wore on and the cafe began to quiet down, Emily stood up, gathering her things slowly. The weight of the world still hung around her, but it was lighter now, less suffocating. She no longer felt the constant pressure to be someone she wasn't. She didn't have to force herself to fit into a mold that wasn't made for her. She stepped out of the cafe into the cool night air, her footsteps steady and purposeful. The world around her had not changed, but Emily had. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first entered the cafe. She was, in some quiet, profound way, more herself. That evening, as she sat in her apartment, she found herself standing in front of the mirror once more. But this time, there was no uncertainty. No fear. Just the reflection of a woman who was learning to accept herself, flaws, mistakes, and all. She had come to understand something vital. The journey to self-acceptance wasn't about finding perfection. It was about embracing her imperfections and realizing that she was worthy of love and respect just as she was. And in that moment, she smiled. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt at peace with who she was. The search for approval, the need for validation, the constant striving for something outside of herself, those things no longer held power over her. She had learned, slowly but surely, that the only approval she needed was her own. Emily didn't just perform a song, she changed the conversation. In a world that tried to define her by her blindness, by her appearance, by her silence, she rewrote the script. Her music broke down walls, shattered prejudice, and reminded us that brilliance has no dress code, no label, no limits. She became the voice for thousands of unheard stories. So the next time someone tells you that you're not good enough, not talented enough, or simply not enough, remember Emily Parker. The blind girl who stepped onto the stage and lit up the world.